Hello, everyone. My name is Luis Hernandez, and I will be doing my final presentation on the country of Cuba. To begin, I'll be doing a general overview of the island of Cuba. I'll then go in depth in the history of Cuba's government, as well as where it currently stands. Then lead into healthcare and the education system, and why they became one of the best systems worldwide, considering their economy. And we'll then go into the tourism sector and lastly end with the Cuban people and a conclusion to the project. So, what is Cuba? As everyone already knows, Cuba is a communist island. It is also the largest country in the Caribbean in terms of population and size. It is home to 11 million people, with its capital city of Havana having a population of around 2.1 million citizens. Cuban food is a mixture of Spanish and Caribbean dishes that incorporates a lot of spices. Many traditional meals include black beans, shredded beef, rice, and plantains. Cuba's official language is Spanish, however, they do teach English in schools. They do not have an official religion, but Roman Catholicism is widely practiced throughout the country. Their main exports include fish, medical products, coffee, and citrus fruits, while their main imports include oil, food, chemicals, and machinery. They have two official currencies that are accepted in different areas of the country: the peso or the CUP, and the convertible peso or the CUC. Many Cubans are actually paid in a peso or CUP because it's very cheap and is worth little compared to the CUC. And they use this for most of their expenses, while the CUC or convertible peso is actually worth more and is mostly given to tourists and used to pay for luxury items. And lastly, the Cuban government owns and controls all broadcast media, including the country's radio, TV, and news broadcast networks, which will actually help us tie into the next slide. However, as you can see here, these are just people buying the newspaper and reading it. The newspaper in Cuba has actually become somewhat of a controversy, as some believe it is the only way to get news from the outside world, while others believe that it is a very biased newspaper. So, the Cuban government. Their government is a Marxist-Leninist single-party state that has been headed by a member of the Castro family for many decades until just recently this year when Raul Castro stepped down. Since the fall of the US-backed dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista in 1959 through a revolution led by Fidel Castro, Cuba has been a one-party state led by Castro, and since February 2008 by his chosen successor and younger brother, Raul Castro. As you can see here in the right picture, he's shaking hands with Barack Obama when in 2016 they decided to fix ties with United States and Cuban governments. However, recently, Miguel Diaz-Canel became president in April 2018 in a handover by Raul, finally ending 6 decades of rule by the Castro family. Miguel Diaz is a former engineer born after the revolution that brought Fidel Castro to power and has promised to maintain the island's one-party communist system. Cuba also, as I mentioned before, has the most repressive media environment in the Americas, where almost all traditional media is, of course, state-run. So their online access is tightly controlled and very, very expensive. Many Cubans are forced to use something called the package or El Paquete to get a mix of news from the outside world, which is all distributed on USB sticks. This, of course, is run through somewhat of an underground market and kind of by word of mouth. Because, of course, if the government finds out or if the government knows someone has one of these, you will get in trouble. Health and education. Cuba's healthcare system is somewhat of a source of pride for the communist government. Cuba has very well trained, intelligent doctors who have also become an important export earner. And what this means is Cuba will actually send out their doctors to other places in need of them. And those places will pay the doctors more than what they get paid in Cuba. However, the Cuban government will actually take a cut of their pay. This has, again, been somewhat of a topic of controversy amongst doctors and people in Cuba. Some don't see it as worth it to study and become a doctor, and at the end of the day, you earn little to nothing. However, their child mortality rate is up on the list with the world's richest countries, with around 6 deaths for every 1,000 births. And despite more than half a century of an economic embargo placed on by the United States, the average life expectancy matches the United States with around 79 years. Their healthcare is top tier due to the government placing priority on disease prevention, universal coverage, and access to treatment. However, it's hard to know how long this will last with Cuba's economic problems and deteriorating health infrastructure. Cuba's education system is 100% funded by the government, meaning Cuban students at all levels can attend school for free. They're also the nation in the world that has the highest share of their national budget placed into education, standing at around 13%. Since Cuba has made education for their people a high priority, citizens can attend their university and earn as many degrees as they want free of charge. However, many people have gone against getting degrees or using their education for government-funded low-wage jobs and have decided to put their efforts towards higher income jobs in the tourism section like taxi drivers or restaurant waiters and waitresses, which actually helps us tie into the next slide. Tourism. When it comes to tourism, there are the good and the bad. To start with the good, travel-wise, Cuba is actually the least expensive in the Caribbean. Besides its low-cost living, tourists are drawn by the perfect weather and more than 300 white sandy beaches with beautiful crystal clear water. On top of that, Havana actually seems like it belongs in a completely different era with the vintage American cars, art and decoration, architecture, and lack of violent crime. Just stepping into Cuba, you'll see and just feel how different it is compared to the United States and the world we currently live in. There are these things called casa particulare, and what they are is a B&B style private homestays that offer tourists basically an authentic experience to be able to actually live in Cuba and feel what it would be like. And it provides the locals who own these places with a much needed income because, of course, the tourism section is the highest income you can earn if you live in Cuba. On a side note, Cuba was Airbnb's fastest growing market in 2016, which makes sense after the Cubans saw how much money they could make working with tourists. Now, on the bad side, Cuba is once again difficult to enter for individual US tourists. President Barack Obama's easing of travel restrictions was recently rolled back, and visits must now be part of an organized tour. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has tightened the economic embargo by banning Americans from certain hotels and businesses with ties to the military. Also, being a tourist in Cuba, you will also notice that internet access is patchy and connection speeds can be painfully slow. Although on the bright side, it was recently announced just yesterday that Cuba's state telephone company will allow mobile phone customers to use the internet via a new 3G network starting on this Thursday or December 6, 2018. But as with previous tech advances in the island nation, only those who can afford it will be able to take advantage of the access, of course, which remains under the control of the autocratic government. And finally, the Cuban people. Cubans are known for being some of the friendliest and most honest people. They are loud, happy, and generous with their time, especially when it comes to helping others. The people in Cuba are truly what make the country special. To accurately understand the culture and history of Cuba, one must first start with the people. Cubans are always out and about, talking with neighbors, friends, co-workers, and engaging with those around them, contrary to Western beliefs. They value family and friends over almost anything else, spending time and contributing with their community. Because of the lack of technology, you can also see that many of the people are connected with each other instead of devices, making socializing somewhat of a necessity. Despite the history and economic problems Cuba has suffered through, Cubans genuinely love their country and feel a very strong loyalty to their island. They are proud of their strong will and ability to fight through the toughest of problems. Many Cubans, however, are split between the rich and poor, racial backgrounds, gender, and even political affiliation. Here's some pictures I chose to include because I believe it gives a good representation of the people and is something that many don't see or understand. One of the main reasons Cubans are separated and conflicted is because of political beliefs. Many are grateful for the Castro regime, as shown here on the left side, while others completely resent it, and each, of course, have their reasons why. So in these pictures on the left side, these are actually students trying to show their love after the death of Fidel Castro. In the bottom left, you can see one student crying, while the top left, you see, a student with a very sad face. These students loved Fidel because of the opportunities that he provided them. These students would not be able to attend school for free if it was not for Fidel Castro. However, many other people see it a completely different way, as Cuba is in ruins because of the systems and policies that Fidel Castro put in place. As you can see here in the middle pictures, if you were to visit Cuba, this is what you would see. Very torn down and non-repaired buildings, and people with kind of worn clothes, and everything just looks very poor. However, the bottom picture shows kids happy as ever. It shows people living with what little they actually have. And on the right, I kind of wanted to show the tourism section. And on the top right, you see a group singing and making music while one dances. And in the background of that picture, you see the different tourists watching for the pleasure. On the bottom right, you actually see a tourist taking a picture with one of those dancers or a selfie in the middle of the streets of Havana. And it's actually funny to me because you see a Cuban lady showing her pride for America with her hand over her heart and an American printed tank top and bandana. So I kind of showed these pictures because unfortunately, many outsiders don't see the real side of Cuba. The one hidden behind tourism, showing its true identity. Being a Cuban American born and raised in Florida, I have nothing but respect for my family and what they had to go through. I am intrigued with the history, the culture, the people, and everything Cuba has to offer. Being in this class, studying the island my family was raised in, was truly a blast. I was fascinated with everything I learned and could not be happier that I could go back home and talk to my mom about everything I researched and learned. So, personally, I believe Cuba is one of the most interesting countries, and I could not be prouder to be a Cuban American. Thank you.